Hello, Year 9 students. Today we will talk about understanding characterization. So this is a new online lesson, so please make sure you write the title and the lesson objectives as we go through together. I'll pause the video here and there and I'll say off you go so that you can do the work. All right, great. Now let's move on to the next slide. And the next slide talk about the learning objectives. First of all, to be able to understand different types of fictional characters. All right, to be able to understand different types of fictional characters. We've got different fictional characters, we've got different types as well. We will go through them together in this online lesson. So make sure you watch the video until the end to be able to understand the concept of characterization. All right, we will give a definition to that, to understand what it means and what are the different aspects that are related to characterization. So make sure you write the title and the lesson objectives. Off you go. Awesome, welcome back. Now, the lesson development. We will go through the lesson development together, and I forgot to write an L right there in development, mind that. So what I can expect from the lesson, what do I expect from the lesson? So in this lesson, we will go through some keywords together. Okay, we will begin by exploring characterization keywords. All right, I'll mention a couple of keywords and we will go through them together. Number two, fictional characters. We will go through fictional characters. We will speak about how fictional characters are presented to us in texts. By text, I mean short stories, novels, okay, extract from stories, just characters, anything that involves characters. Now, the third part is characterization. We will go through the definition. We will learn about how authors choose to present their characters. All right, there is a way for the authors to present their characters. We will go through that together. Number four, techniques. Okay, we will learn about characterization techniques and how to apply them, because you will be applying those characterization techniques yourselves after you identify them in the text that we will go through together. So I want you to identify and apply at the same time. All right, let's go to the next slide. Characterization keywords. Now, here are some important keywords that you need in order to understand the lesson for today or for tomorrow or after tomorrow, depending on the timing of the online lesson. First of all, we've got protagonists, right? Who are the protagonists? Okay, who are the protagonists or who is the protagonist? Now, some of you know what the word protagonist means and others don't. I want you to make some research and write a definition for each of the following. Antagonists, round characters, flat characters, dynamic characters, static characters, characterization, direct characterization, indirect characterization as well. So these are the keywords that I want you to look for and look into in this lesson. Okay, now an introduction to characters. What do you mean by an introduction to characters? When you introduce yourself to others, you are the character. When others are introducing themselves to you, they are the characters that you're trying to go and understand their personalities as well. So when you meet somebody new at school or anywhere else, it is good to have an understanding about the characteristics that they have to see whether you will have something in common with them or not. What does this mean is that when you meet with someone new at school or anywhere else, you want to know what you have in common. Do they play football just like you do? Do they like gaming just like you do? Or they just like reading books? Do you understand? Maybe you do like reading books as well. So you've got these different characteristics. Are they fun? Are they funny? Do they have sense of humor? Are they very serious? Do you understand? So there are these different characteristics. They're not just related to hobbies, but they're related to personality as well. So when you meet someone, you try to find out who they are. You try to find out what they do, and so that you can relate to them and that you can, do you understand, be with them in that environment, and you can create something new with them, maybe play a game together or go to the library together if they are good readers. So you try to know the other person in order to relate to them. So they introduce themselves to you and you introduce yourself to them. This is what happens when we meet new people. Now, I want you to give your opinion. How do you determine what kind of characteristics they will have, these people that you meet, the new people that you meet, that they will have based on your first impression? All right, I'll repeat the question again. How do you determine what kind of characteristics, right? Funny, serious, trustworthy, faithful, okay, sense of humor, humorous, adventurous. What kind of characteristics these people will have based on your first impression. Okay, I want you to give me your opinion. I want you to guess as well, how do you determine what kind of characteristics they will have? So do that on the notebook. You've got roughly 2 minutes. Off you go. We'll come back. Now, fictional characters. Fictional characters are characters that are fictional, which means imaginary. We read about in novels and stories that are fictional. So remember that fictional is different than non-fictional. Non-fictionals are characters that we see in newspaper articles, we see in reviews or reports, okay, on television shows as well. Those are non-fictional characters, okay, real characters. Now, fictional characters are totally different. They are imaginary characters. Just like real people you meet, fictional characters also have different types of characteristics that you will see, okay? You can tell a lot about a fictional character based on the following. So I've given you a list of 5 questions that you can ask yourself in order to understand a fictional character. How do they speak? How do these characters speak? Do they have a certain tone? Do they have certain language, certain tongue, certain dialect? How do they speak? And when you answer that question, you will know more about this character. Number 2, how do they interact with people? How do they talk to others? How do they meet with others? How do they play with others? Or how are they around others or other characters? Okay, number 3, what are their thoughts like? What are their thoughts like? How do they think? All right, and we can see this in novels and short stories. Unfortunately, we can never know this in real life. In real life, it's a little bit different, you understand? Although you can't tell this with people in real life, we cannot tell people's thoughts in real life. You cannot just look at them and know what they're thinking, all right? That is not the case in real life, but we can do that in novels and short stories because the narrators or the writers give us that quality, and that we can know what other characters are thinking of and what other thoughts like. So this number 3 here will help you identify those characters and understand them more. Number 4, what do they look like based on outer appearance, which means how do they look like from the outside? All right, are they thin characters, slim characters, fit characters? You understand? Do they have muscles? Now, you know, based on their appearance, you understand? Do they have a beard? Do they have mustache? This and that, right? Long hair, short hair. Outer appearance is also important to understand those fictional characters. Maybe it's a monster. You understand? They've got 4 arms and 6 arms and 4 legs. You understand? 3 eyes, whatever, right? So you get to understand more when you answer question 4 about those characters. Now, number 5, can you think of any other factors that we can think of when determining types of characters? Now, can you, personally speaking, think of any other factors that would help you and other readers determine, right, these fictional characters' characteristics? Okay, so can you think of those? If you can, write a few on your notebooks. You've got roughly 2 minutes. Off you go. We'll come back, meeting different types of characters. Now remember that we will go through all of these together when we are online. I just want you to go through them alone with my explanation to this video so that you can write what needs to be written and you can make some research as well. All right, I don't want you to be passive learners. I want you to be active learners, and I'm just the facilitator. All right, let's go to meeting different types of characters. From previous knowledge, you know that there are 2 types of fictional characters, protagonists and antagonists. Okay, these are the 2 types of fictional characters. Now, protagonists are the characters who attempt to do something good. All right, they like to do good things in the story. Number 2, usually seen as the hero or heroine. All right, 3, usually called round or dynamic characters. We can also call them round or dynamic characters. Remember this point. This point is very important. Okay, protagonists are also called round dynamic characters, right? Antagonists now. Antagonists are characters or force, or it's a force or a character that holds back something good from happening. All right, doesn't want something good to happen to people. Right, we've got a lot of examples when it comes to this. Number two, they are usually seen as evil characters or the villain. Right, someone who hates everyone and wants to destroy the world and so on. Third, character usually becomes evil as a result of circumstances in the text. So something goes wrong in their lives, so they want to become evil. All right, they're not just born evil, but something happens throughout the text, throughout the story, that makes them feel that they want to be the bad guy, or to understand the bad girl, or right. So try to understand the difference between protagonist and antagonist so that you know how to identify these two characters in the texts. Okay, now let's go to the next slide, introducing round and flat characters. Round and flat characters. We've got round characters. This is a well-developed character that has a lot of good traits, right? This character is well developed throughout the story. You read a lot about him, right? You see a lot about her in the story when you read. A lot of good traits as well, right? Number two, these are realistic and almost real-life characters. These characters are so realistic, almost real-life characters. So almost non-fictional characters. Number three, most major characters are round characters. The major characters, right? Those characters that help develop the story, that help create the scenes of the story, help create the events and the actions in the story. Those are the round characters. Now, number four, this character is capable of going through changes throughout the story. This character changes a lot throughout the story. For example, he's a very happy person and then becomes sad, or very angry and then becomes very calm, in a sense. So his personality changes, to understand. A lot of changes happen to these characters. That's why they're round characters, all right? They change a lot throughout the text, okay? So he's capable of changing, or she's capable of changing. Now let's go to flat characters. Totally the opposite. The characters are not very well developed. These flat characters, they're not well developed in the story. You just read one line about them and then you move on. Do you understand? They're not well developed. Nothing more about them, just for them being a character. Right. Number two does not have many good traits. All right. These characters, they don't have no traits at all. Do you understand? There's a couple of traits here and there, and that's it. You can really tell by reading that this is a flat character. Number three, they can easily be defined in more than a sentence. All right, you can define them in more than a sentence because there isn't anything much known about them, right? You can't really know anything about them when you read the text. Just one sentence can tell us all about them. All right, these are the characters that are called flat characters. Number four, they are your background characters. You see them in the background a lot. They make the story, all right, but they are in the background. They're not really important, okay? They do not really contribute positively to the story, right? Without them, the story will still exist and the events will still happen, to understand? So they don't quite contribute, to understand, in the events or the actions of the story, but they are in the background. They add something to the story, but it's not the, to understand, thing that they would add to the story. So remember that. This is the difference between round characters, flat characters, totally the opposite. Now, let's move on to the dynamic and static characters. Now, dynamic characters, these characters go through important personality changes throughout the book. It is usually the protagonist in the story. As I said before, the dynamic characters are those heroes or heroines in the story. Those characters that are protagonists. Okay, they make changes throughout the story and they change themselves throughout the story as they go through. Right. So, for example, they're weak at the beginning of the story, but then they become so strong and they start fighting evil. All right. Now, this character comes to some realization that permanently changes him or her. So they realize something, you understand, throughout the story, throughout the text. They realize that, for example, the world is going to end and they need to save it. They realize that their friends need them and they need to be there for them. So there is this realization that happens in the middle of the short story or the novel where they triggers something within them and they change, and that makes the change. All right, so these are the dynamic characters. The static characters are characters that remain the same throughout the story. They don't change. The static characters, they remain the same throughout the story. Paul is Paul throughout the story. Nothing changes about Paul. Do you understand? Not his personality, not his way of speaking, not his, do you understand? Weak. If his weak stays weak throughout the story, if his strong stays strong throughout the story, nothing changes throughout his story, right? If it's positive, it stays positive. If it's negative, stays negative throughout the story, which is not the case with dynamic characters. Sometimes they're very negative characters, but then they become positive characters and have got different view of the events that happen throughout the story. Although something may happen to this character, the static character, they do not end up changing, never change. They never change. They stay the same throughout the whole novel, throughout the whole story. All right, remember that. This is the difference between the dynamic characters and the static characters. Remember these differences because you have to identify all of these characters when you read in texts or short stories. And you will use these characters yourselves. All right, now you need to understand them to be able to use them. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, what do we mean by characterization? I want you to write this down. What do we mean by characterization? Now, this is very simple, okay? And it's simply put, characterization can be defined as the process in which the author reveals the personality of his characters. Now, the author or the writer, when he writes down something about the characters, he kind of reveal who the characters are. He kind of tell us what the characters do to understand who they are in the story. Now, the author can make use of direct or indirect characterization to reveal his characters, right? Now, what do you think these mean, direct and indirect characterization? They're very easy to tell from the definition, to be honest. Direct, indirect characterization. I'll give you roughly 1 minute to write down on the notebook what they mean, and then go ahead and watch the video to know if you got it right. Go for it. Now, direct characterization. As we said, characterization is how the authors or the writers reveal the characteristics of their characters. What do the characters do? How do they feel? And so on. Direct characterization directly tells the audience what type of characters we will be reading about. Do you understand? I'll give you an example here, a very good example. The patient boy and quiet girl were both well-mannered and did not disobey their mother. Now, we can clearly see that the boy is patient, the girl is quiet. These are characteristics, you understand, that define the boy and the girl, right? So the explanation is that the author is directly telling us, or the audience, that the personality of these two kids, the boy is patient, the girl is quiet, directly telling us their characterizations, you understand, or their characteristics. Now, indirect characterization is when the author shows us. All right, it doesn't tell us, but he shows us. He explains, he portrays, he conveys, do you understand, the personality of the characters instead of directly telling us. He doesn't directly tell us, but he shows us, right? The following slide explains 5 different ways to determine the types of characters through indirect characterization. So let's go through these to understand 5 types of characterization. Indirect characterization. Direct characterization is very simple to understand, but indirect characterization is based on these 5 different types. Speech, okay, the technique that the authors use is that speech. What does the character say? The character says something, and through what he says or she says, we can tell their personality or their characters. What they do and how they speak. Do you understand? Very important. How does the character speak? Does the character speak in an angry voice, in a sad voice, in a very happy voice? All right. So that tells us a lot about the characteristics of the character, right? So this is indirect. So the author doesn't tell us this character is funny, but the speech of the character has a joke within it. So we can tell it's funny without the author telling us. It's indirect. All right. Thoughts. What is revealed through the character's feelings and thoughts. All right. Number 3, opinions from other characters. Sometimes when we read a story, other characters giving their opinions about one or a certain character. What is revealed through the character's effect on the people. or on other people. You understand? So this character has some effect on other people. He makes other people laugh. So he is a funny character. We can tell that without the author telling us. Just because he's making others laugh, just because of that effect he has on others, we can tell, okay, his personality or his characteristics. Now, how do other characters react towards this character? How do they react to it? Do they hate him? Do they like him? Do they love him? Do they go, do you understand, and be friend with him? Do you understand? So through these, okay, effects that they have on other characters, we can tell indirectly, okay, what are their characteristics. 4 actions. What does the character do? All right. How does the character behave? Or how does the character do what he does? All right, in the story. Looks. What does the character look like? Is it tall? Is it short? Do you understand? How does the character behave? All right. So these are the 5 techniques that the authors use in order to tell us about these characteristics indirectly. Remember that. All right, indirect characterization, focus on these 5 techniques that you need to know. Write down on your notebooks as well for future references, all right, because you will use these direct and indirect characterization in your own stories. Off you go. Now, welcome back. Practice activity. All right. Now, we've got each of the examples of the next slide are examples of direct characterization. I've given you examples of direct characterization just to understand them even more. However, I want you to change them to indirect characterization. That's the practice. All right. That's the practice. On your notebook, I want you to change the direct characterizations on the next slide. All right. For indirect characterizations, rather than just saying how they felt, all right, or what they did, you are required to explain it to your readers or to show it to your readers through the 5 techniques. Don't forget to use the 5 techniques. Refer to the table on direct characterization techniques to help you. Be as creative as possible. I want you to be creative, all right? I want you to think outside the box and use those 5 techniques. Use all of them. Use all of them because you've got the table there and you can check them out. You've got this table: speech, thoughts, opinions from other characters, actions, and looks. Try to use these techniques and these characters and these indirect characterization techniques in order to answer these practice activity. All right, direct, indirect characterization. So you've got 8 sentences. I want you to change them from direct to indirect characterization. This is the end of today's lesson, basically. Thanks a lot. Please rewatch the video for more information if you want to. If you didn't understand something, you can write it down on your notebook and ask me in the online lesson. Thanks a lot for being here, and off you go.